Over to you, Rod.
Okay, welcome everybody. Um, this is an opportunity for you to get an update on various issues which um, governors have indicated that they need guidance on or would like guidance on. And the first point part of the evening, of course, is Dr. Poppy Gibson, who's going to give us a presentation on wellbeing support to staff under the current work rationale. Thank you, Dr. Poppy Gibson, for giving up your time to make the presentation.
Thank you, Rod. My pleasure. And thank you, Nigel, for inviting me along today. Really excited to make some space on a Monday evening, actually talking about my favourite topic. So welcome, everyone. I was just looking through the chat for those of you that have entered your names and where you're from. And I can see you're from all over the place. I'm in Rayleigh, if any of you know Rayleigh in Essex. Rod, are you happy just for me to launch?
Yes, please. Yes.
Great, thank you. Just to say, can everyone see my slides? Hopefully. Can you see those okay, Rod?
Yes.
Perfect. Unfortunately, while I'm sharing, I can't see any of your faces or the chat, but what I'll do now and again is I will come back and check the chat. And I know that we have Nigel and Rod monitoring that as well. But for the next, I think about 50 minutes, I would like to speak with you about well-being. I'll talk a little bit about why I'm here and hopefully why I think Nigel invited me here to talk to you about that. But I don't want it to be just me talking. I want you to be doing a lot of thinking, hopefully, and possibly sharing. Or if you want to just be more passive and just listen, that's absolutely fine. But what I hope is that we can all take away from this talk something purposeful, or even just something, a slightly fresher perspective, perhaps, on, I'm sure what you're already doing is really good practice, but maybe just some ideas of other things, other maybe inspirational ways that you can support your school and your staff. I just want also, in the name of imposter syndrome, firstly, I myself have been an educator for 18 years. I like to say that, as sometimes my audience are very kind and they do tell me that they are surprised. I'm just, that maybe they're flattering me, but I just want to say I have been an educator for 18 years. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But I'm now a researcher in wellbeing. So hopefully I can bring that to the table. You can bring your governance role and being a governor to the table. That's where you are the expert, definitely not me. So hopefully between us, I want to see this as a bit of a partnership this evening. We can think about the best ways to move forward. But I've just put there my socials. There's my email. I just really want to stress that the next hour together is not enough. I'm really happy for you to email me, for you to find me on Twitter, for you to find me on Instagram, also on LinkedIn. Please do contact me. I'm really happy for you to do so after the talk or any point in the future and just have these conversations because, as you'll know, this is not enough time in one night, but I'm really super excited that Nigel and Rod have made space for a really, really important discussion. So, first of all, then, about me and about you. So, I told you I've been an educator for 18 years. I think it's important that I just spend a couple of minutes telling you a bit more about me, and hopefully I'll learn more about you if you want to talk more through the session. I was the primary school teacher for 11 years and primary school leader, moved up into SLT. I knew I wanted to teach right from when I was 18, so I went into a teacher training degree at Edge Hill and up near Liverpool, up north. And I started teaching at the age of 21, taught for 11 years, absolutely love teaching. I've taught in both private schools and in mainstream schools. I've taught in inner London schools as well as rural schools out in Radlett. Some of you might know that area. So I'm used to a wide range of schools. I moved around quite a lot during my primary teaching and leading career and held a range of responsibility roles as well. And it was just towards the end of that 11 years that I was finishing my PhD in education that I fell into love with research. And so, to cut a very long story short, I moved from the primary school sector into higher education. So I now work at Anglia Ruskin University. Some of you may know it's here in Essex in Chelmsford, although we do have a Cambridge campus and a London campus. So I've been lecturing now for 7 years, so that makes the 18. And now I run 2 degrees in primary education. I'm aware you might be from all different settings. But although my specialty is primary, I also work with secondary schools, sixth forms, other FE provision, and now in higher education. And the main focus for me is on how we can, I don't want to like talk about the government. This isn't a place to be talking about the government, whatever you think of our kind of education legislation. But perhaps we don't have enough focus on wellbeing and mental health in our curriculum. So how can we make sure we're doing the most we can with our autonomy and our agency, and through our teachers' pedagogy, to really make sure that we have the most mentally healthy places for our learners that we can. So that's kind of me. After I finished my PhD, that was a few years ago now, I did a master's in mental health science just for fun. And that really just added an extra string to my bow in terms of understanding kind of that neuroplasticity behind our brains, and more around what actually happens when we are mentally healthy, how this is a thing, how well-being isn't just a buzzword, but how these are things that can lead to physical symptoms when we are not mentally healthy. I know you know all this already, but I think it's really important when we look at education that we have that mix of evidence-based research and theory, but also not forgetting the importance of just experience and practice, and kind of what all our teachers can bring to the table as well. So I'm very much thinking that it's important we have research but also practice-based evidence when we move forward, and that's what I do now. I write a lot. I've written 14 books. I've published a lot of stuff, and if you ever want to publish stuff, get in touch with me. I love people reaching out and co-writing stuff. As for who are you, let's move on, because I'm already talking too much, but I just wanted you to know that I come 100% behind well-being and mental health. That is my passion. I'm sure you will learn that over the next hour together. And who are you? Thank you everyone that's written in the chat. If you haven't, if you wanted to pop your name and your setting into the chat, that would be great, because I will have a look through those at the end. And I think hopefully we will have a really good conversation here tonight. I've been told by Nigel to stop talking at around 6:30. I might cut a bit shorter than that, because I'd love to hear a bit more from you, but I will also invite chances. If you would like to talk through the session, I will flip back and invite anyone if they want to unmute. Sorry, a motorbike. Please also know I'm not the kind of person to put anyone on the spot, though. So if you're someone who does not want to speak for the next hour, I am not going to be doing any awkward icebreakers. I've learned from my university students that never goes down well. No one wants to do that, even as adults. So hopefully, though, if you do share in the chat who you are, and do feel free to follow up after, even if you don't want to talk in this space. So that's kind of hopefully the housekeeping. I know Nigel and Rod said they are recording. So again, I do understand, particularly if you've got something going on in your setting, but you don't want to raise it publicly, please don't feel you need to share anything here, and maybe pop me an email after tonight, and that's something we could talk about off the recording. So let's move forward. I've got 5 things that I'd like us to talk about in the session together. I'm going to start off encouraging you to reflect on what you think well-being is. We're going to move forward into then what self-care is, and why I think we seem to have a real binary between self-care at home and then self-care in our settings. And I know, even if I think for me, what does my self-care at home look like is so different to what does self-care look like when I'm teaching and when I'm at university. I'm not sure we should have such a binary with that. So one thing that I found is supporting me as an educator is trying to see a more blurred boundary between self-care strategies, stuff I can do at home, stuff I can do at work. So for example, at home, I love walking my dog. I've got a German Shepherd. I don't know if any dog fans are amongst you. Feel free to mention dogs in the chat as well. But for me, when I get home, I love walking the dog. And I was wondering then, why at work do I not go outside? And so trying to then question, where can we find parallels between things that work at home and in our setting. And that's what I think we'll talk about there, perhaps what is happening in your school or your setting that is making it the best place for your staff and learners to be. We're going to talk about resilience. I'm putting it here on the agenda because some of you might love that word. I'm sure you've seen that word rolled out in your settings. It's probably my least favourite education word. If you fancy getting a bit spicy about halfway through the meeting, I will encourage anyone to talk to me about resilience. And I'm instead, however, going to question whether there's a better way we can look at that resilience rhetoric, which we see often in our settings at any age. We'll talk a bit about your role as governors. And as I say, I want to point out I am not a governor, although I have been approached a few times. I'm not a governor. I have 3 children, but I'm not a governor. So my youngest is in reception as my adopted child, my middle child's in year 4, my oldest child's in secondary school. So again, I frequently work with their schools, but I'm not a governor. So I just want to say I'm sorry if at any point I've misunderstood your role. Feel free to correct me. And yeah, I'm also excited to learn more about what you do as well. But from what I have read and what I know about my friends that are governors, my husband was a governor at previous schools. So I've hopefully put together 5 strategies that I think would work well for you to bring to your setting. There might be things you already do. If you don't think they'd work well, again, feel free to talk to me and help me learn more. And hopefully we can learn from each other as well. Hopefully some of you will be willing to perhaps share some of that really good wellbeing practice in your school. And then we'll end the session just some recommended reading and resources that you may already know about, I'm sure. If you want any more reading and resources, I have so many, you can just email me, but I didn't want to spam Nigel's lovely coffee and chat. I'm aware it's coffee and chat, not coffee and research. So although I could give you bedtime readings till the cows come home, I've just put a couple of bits and bobs on there. I'm aware as well, you are busy people, so you might not have time to sit and read a 30-page research article, but I've thrown in podcast, website and some other bits in there as well. And then I'm hoping that maybe if we aim to finish around 6:20, that we can make that space to have some conversation if you would like to. So hopefully that sounds good and sounds interesting. Let's dive in. The first thing I want to say, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, is that when our teachers are well, we are going to see increased pupil attainment and achievement. I mean, there's a lot of words here that are very subjective. What do we think it means to be well? What do we think attainment and achievement really mean in education? But I've just summarized there, and I'm not going to read out every slide. I know Nigel said he'll share the slides, but I sometimes put a lot on the slide. I know some of you are going to be big readers, but I'll also embellish. So I just wanted to start really by highlighting it is so important, isn't it, that our teachers feel well, that our learners feel well, because it feeds into everything. It feeds into those positive relationships that they can have with each other. It feeds into, I've highlighted there, I've underlined the kind of 3 key things, this sense of fulfillment. And we know we have a teaching retention crisis. We have a teaching recruitment crisis in many sectors of education at the moment. Even in higher education, we're seeing, and I'm sure you're aware, if you've seen on the news, I've seen many fellow colleagues being made redundant in higher education because the landscape of that is changing in turn. So it's really important we have teachers that love the job, that want to be in the job, that aren't going to leave the job, and that foster that safe space for their learners, and that leads into their pupils' emotional health. So again, I mentioned briefly one of my children is adopted. I think a lot of my interest in wellbeing comes from that. I will also, I'm sure, overshare during the session, but here's one example. And I love my daughter's teachers are wonderful, but again, this isn't a place to talk about trauma-informed practice, but I'm sure those of you that know about trauma and trauma-informed practice, again, it's a very contentious issue. Should teachers have to deal with the understanding of trauma? Should teachers need to know about trauma to be a good teacher? One thing that when my daughter first started school, I was called in and her teachers told me that she had eaten a glue stick. Now, I, as a parent of a traumatized child that I adopted from care, this had no shock factor for me. And I said, perhaps she was trying to self-regulate from eating the glue stick, because again, those of you who know trauma will know that a child chewing things is a very good way to help them regulate. Hula hoops. I remember when my daughter first came home, we gave her loads of hula hoops, which were praised by the social worker as they're so crunchy. Eating hula hoops is a very good way for a child to regulate. So I questioned whether that was what she was doing. And that also made me question the fact they're shocked that she ate the glue, made me think we needed a follow-up conversation around trauma, which we did. And again, it's nothing from the teacher's fault. We're all still learning. We're all in this together. We're all learning together. Another conversation for another time. Perhaps our teacher training does not fully prepare our teachers to be teachers. But what I really want to just highlight is that clearly when our teachers are happy and well, they can have those better conversations, the better understanding, the better support for our learners, and then lead to the better outcomes, whatever they may be, life outcomes as well as academic outcomes. So again, I've put there's further research. I didn't want to go through all the research, but if you're interested, put me an email and we'll happily send you some very interesting literature reviews that have taken place on this, some interesting empirical research around how teacher wellbeing very clearly affects pupil outcomes. And then just to prepare me, I did some research of my own. I checked out exactly what school governors do, and I found a range of things. First of all, I found out you're amazing, so thank you for everything that you do. And I found lots of different, when we look on Google, other search engines are available. I found out lots of different summaries of what governors might do, but I love this one. And I wanted to bring it to the table in case you've forgotten how important governors are, because it said governors are strategic leaders within schools and have a vital role to play in making sure every child gets the best possible education. So bear in mind, we've just looked at how teacher wellbeing helps them get the best education. Then perhaps part of your role is looking how you're supporting teacher wellbeing. However, I also know that your role as governors is looking out for the head teacher, and the head teacher can cascade that to their staff. But what I think we'll talk about today is maybe some of that flexibility amongst, what you can do within your remit as a governor. Although you are wonderful, you're not superhuman. Your time is not endless. So what I really want us to think about is what you can do in a concise and succinct but purposeful way to hopefully lift wellbeing in your schools. And if yours is already wonderful, then again, hopefully you might share something at the end with us. But private question though, just for fun. This is again optional. Maybe actually, if your cameras are off, you don't even need to show me with your camera on. Let's do it with cameras off. That's absolutely fine. The private question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much is on your plate right now? Now, normally this is the kind of question I'd start a wellbeing talk with in the room. So I normally present face to face. But don't worry about showing me. I just want you to reflect. What I would normally ask my audience to do is hold up their fingers, with everyone with their eyes closed, to hold their fingers up between 1 to 10. I can't see your fingers right now, but just to yourself reflect. If 1 means everything is feeling very calm, you're feeling very content, your workload is very low at the moment, you're probably at a 1. 5 is somewhere in the middle, 10 if you're feeling stressed. Now, the reason it's important to reassess that is thinking, how do we think our staff might feel? How much are we even checking in with them on how they feel? I think that's another big part of the research I do, is where teachers don't feel they have a voice. I recently spoke with the TES. I'm sure many of you know TES. TES do a really fantastic yearly wellbeing report, and it just came out last month, I think it was, and I was invited onto their expert panel. You can find that video on the TES website if you look up TES, Times Educational Supplement wellbeing report. You can see our video on there where we dissect the report a little bit, but you can also read the report. And what's interesting is they also do one every year. You can see how the shape of teacher wellbeing is changing over time. But the question is, if a lot is going on for you right now, how are those around you feeling? How can we navigate this when perhaps we're feeling more stressed than ever? And I don't know about you, but every term, and I remember this when I was in primary school as well, every term I think, if I can just get through this term, I'm sure next term will be calmer. But somehow the next term comes and it's totally chaotic and manic and busy. And I'll say, if I can just get through this term or this half term, because I know as teachers, we often live in half terms as well. Unfortunately, at uni, we don't have the half term break. But then we'll think, okay, I'm sure next trimester will be quieter. And it never seems to be. And I don't know whether your life feels the same. But we are living in a very busy time when we're living in the age of information where everything's at our fingertips. Yet somehow we still seem to be struggling with that cognitive overload. So if your number's high, hopefully what you'll also take away from today is thinking how you can lower that number on a personal level, but also thinking what might that number be for the people that you are governing within your settings. So let's just reflect for a minute. What is well-being? How would you define that? I'm just going to quickly come back to the screen. I wondered if anyone wanted to share a good definition, either verbally, if you wanted to unmute, or just pop any definitions of well-being into the chat and I'll read them out. I'm just going to give us about 30 seconds if anyone would like to define well-being for us. I'm definitely not going to put Nigel and Rod on the spot.
Oh, they're coming in.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And again, like I say, no pressure. You do not have to share, but thank you. So we've got 2 definitions come into the chat. So I just want to also say there's no right or wrong answer really, is there? We've got a lovely first one in here, the difference between thriving and surviving. Yeah, I think that's a really great way of thinking about it, isn't it? Really love that. Thank you very much. We've got the state of being comfortable, healthy and happy. I love that. Yeah, comfortable. How often, and if any of you may have been teachers yourself, how often are we uncomfortable? How often am I stood in front of a lecture theatre of 200 really needing to go to the toilet and I can't because I'm in the middle of a lesson? Or I also know from my friends that are still teachers, they stay dehydrated on purpose so they won't need to go to the toilet. And I've actually got several friends that have told me that when we talk about what's your water intake looking like, they'll say, I just don't drink when I'm at school because I don't want to be uncomfortable. So to use Charlotte's word, the opposite of comfortable there. Isn't that shocking? to purposely not drink enough water. Normally we're trying to encourage people to do so. So thank you for that one, Charlotte. We've got Ruth who says being well physically, mentally and emotionally. Love that. What a great holistic view, that it's something bigger than actually just our mental health. And I know you all know this. Thank you for those 3 suggestions. Let's continue. So well-being therefore is something much bigger, something that feeds into our day-to-day being, and clearly is important to focus on, yet we might argue there is not enough time for it. I'm sharing this infographic. You may have seen this one before, but I love this. And just to remind you, if you didn't know, there are 5 ways of well-being according to the New Economics Foundation. This is popularly used as a framework in lots of other wellbeing resources. The idea that there are 5 ways of wellbeing, they can all look very different. And of course, they vary depending on who we are, but also different times of the day, week, year, different times of our life. Different ones of these can help us be well in different ways. So again, I'm not going to read out the slide, but just so you're aware, one is around connection. And not necessarily connecting face to face, but also connecting online. Some of you might enjoy using social media or have Facebook groups or even WhatsApp groups. This fantastic governance group where you can connect and relate to people. And that's what's important, is feeling you relate. Just like we know the children and learners in our classrooms need to learn to relate to each other. It's really important you have found those pockets of people you relate to, being active, taking notice, which is really around mindfulness there and being present, keeping learning. So again, this is one we'll kind of think about later, how much learning is going on for your staff in your school. Is there a worry that they don't want to go on CPD courses because someone's going to have to cover them? And I've seen that happen a lot in schools as well. Unfortunately, we know funding is a massive issue. You'll know more than me about funding. So how much space is there for our staff to learn in different ways, or maybe without the need for courses, because learning can look like anything. Your music teacher in your school, when could they do a music workshop for staff? So thinking about how learning is a key way to keep building those neural pathways, which can lead to that dopamine hit we need that feeds into our well-being. And also giving. So again, a really nice one. I talk a lot to my students about volunteering. I volunteer as well. Some of you might volunteer also, but actually we often think we're too busy. But I always say to my students, you can make time for the things that you want to do. So really also thinking about where our boundaries need to lie in our life, so we do make space for the things that we would like to do that will nurture our well-being. And these are just some basics, and I'm sure you know these. I'm sure you all know the theorist who talks to us about our hierarchy of needs, which is, of course, you know the answer, Maslow. Yes, of course. Who talks about meeting basic needs. And you can see now why I'm so concerned when I have teachers telling me they purposely don't drink because they don't have to go to the bathroom. It's one of the most basic needs, isn't it? Eating, feeling comfortable, back to Charlotte's word from the chat, celebrating small achievements. Have a think about your school or setting. Where are staff achievements celebrated? Do you have a board? Is there something in the staff room? Is there something in the newsletter? And again, we're often really good as schools for celebrating what our learners are doing, and rightly so. How much are we celebrating what our staff are doing? What all of the school team are doing as well? How much do we share what's happening in their outside lives coming in? So if they've run a marathon or whatever it is they've done, certainly that's a big achievement. But how much are we celebrating our staff? Because feeding back into everything we mentioned earlier around teacher well-being, if we're seeing school and home as totally separate things, we're going to make it harder for that well-being to transfer between them. What we want to do is see about breaking down some of that barrier so that the well-being is transferable between both sites, right? We don't want to see them as two compartmentalized parts of our life. And asking for support and health. So again, just to pick up that last bullet point, how well are your staff signposts to ask for help from others? What is up in your staff room, on a board, to remind them to seek help? How well is your head teacher? How well are they at role modeling seeking help? Are they sending you emails at 11 p.m. at night? Is that a sign, a slight red flag that perhaps they're not role modeling healthy boundaries to staff? So really making sure that we are encouraging that role modeling from your heads and your senior leadership team. So again, one way that I do that with my staff that I manage is encouraging them. I appreciate you might work at 11 p.m. at night. I do as well sometimes, you might sometimes, but then setting the sending option on the email so it arrives 8 a.m. the next day rather than arriving in their inbox at 11 p.m., especially if they haven't turned notifications off and they're going to be pinging up. So little things like that are just making a more healthy area, even in our inboxes, for example. So moving on, thinking, what is self-care? How would you define it? And where does your school or setting make time and space for self-care? What do you think that looks like in your setting? And again, I'm going to invite you, if you'd like to type anything in the chat, either a definition of self-care, or if anyone wants to unmute and verbally share, feel free. I'm going to give us about 30 seconds or so, up to a minute if we need it. How would we define self-care? Or have you got any really good examples of self-care in your setting that you've seen? Feel free to share. Look, I'm actually staying hydrated tonight. So Nigel, you'll be impressed. I am doing some self-care while we talk on the coffee and chat. Not coffee, unfortunately. And I think what's really important is also remembering that these are real concepts. And I have been in settings where they seem to think well-being and self-care are just words, a bit like resilience that I told you we'll talk about in a minute. But actually, when we appreciate their value and their meaning, as I say, we can role model those to those around us in our networks. So we've got a message come in. Oh, fantastic. Charlotte, thank you again. Charlotte's saying taking time to do things to help you live well and improve both your physical health and mental health. I love that. Taking the time. Yeah, because we can make time. We can. And I love that you started your sentence with that. Read a good book. Yes, 100%.
Uh-oh.
And you know what? Actually, Robin, I've just started a book, those of you that read, and you get about 2 chapters in, 3 chapters in, shop. Like, no more time for bad books.
Seems like Dr. Gibson keeps freezing.
I think we've lost Dr. Gibson.
Yeah.
Whoops.
But yeah, I find, because how often do you come home? Oh, hopefully I'm.
She's probably gone out to come back in again.
Yeah, she's coming back.
Yeah.
Hi, can you see me and hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're back. We
Oh.
weren't losing you.
So sorry. So I will tell you now, bad Wi-Fi is not good for well-being. I'm so sorry about that. That is definitely high on my hierarchy of needs. So let's move forward and think how we can ensure that we are encouraging well-being in our schools and what that might look like. This is just a really quick one. I love this. You might have people on your governing board, in your network, that find it difficult to talk about their well-being. Oh, I realise I'm not.
We need to go back to share copy.
Not showing my screen. Let me share. So here we go. Can we see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm not sure if, like me, any of you have people in your network that find it tricky sometimes to talk about their well-being, to talk about how they're feeling. But this is a really nice one that I use with my staff, which is about actually, if you were a battery, so kind of depersonalizing the emotion. How are you feeling? And I talk to my staff about how stressful it is. And I don't know if you've been in this position when your iPhone, other phones are available, when your phone is down to 1% battery, and you're waiting for a text or that email, or you've got to make a phone call, how stressful that is. And it's the same as humans. If we let our battery get that low, we are living in that stress zone that we do not need to be living in. So often I'll just say to my staff, how full's your battery? I'll also do it at the start of a staff meeting. We meet online. I'll get them to put a battery emoji in the chat. It's a green battery, red battery. A really quick way that you can ask staff about their well-being without them, particularly if they're not very happy talking about emotions. So that's just a really nice one that I use with my staff. And a reminder then, off the back of, thank you to those people that shared types of self-care. Did you know that actually there are 8 types of self-care? And again, remembering that they don't all have to be a bubble bath. The amount of things we see online that seem to frame this faux self-care, FAUX, this idea of self-care being something that should be pretty and probably with candles and probably with a bubble bath, is so not true. I've seen, particularly with my adult students now on my degree courses, financial well-being, financial self-care, is something that really feeds into them feeling well and removing anxiety. My other favorite one, you'll probably guess from looking at this, is that one bottom right, the work self-care. So again, you might think work self-care, this sounds like a strange oxymoron that does not fit together, but work self-care definitely is around that time management. Have you seen the MRI scans of brains? I'm sure you've all seen this. The MRI scans of brains that showed when we have
On again.
Have Zoomings back to back. How often have you been in that situation? Oh, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
So sorry about that. So I was just saying that work self-care is not something we always think goes together, but really making sure you have breaks between meetings. If you know a meeting's only half an hour, still making sure you schedule that hour, for example, so you will have that break at the end of the meeting instead of going back to back 3 meetings. And then just before I talk about, I've brought together 5 strategies that I think we could use in our schools. I just want to challenge the word resilience, because when we read around mental health and well-being, we often see this word resilience being used. One other thing I'll throw out there, I'm not sure if any of you are aware of sepsis, but I'll use this as a teachable moment for sepsis as well. I am a sepsis survivor. When I was a primary school teacher in my late 20s, I developed sepsis, which it was because I had an infection that was unspotted, and I ended up in intensive care in a septic coma. The reason I'm telling you this, also because you should know about sepsis, because it's a silent killer. But what was really interesting for me, and this always haunts me a little bit, is that when I went back to teaching after a significant period of illness, people didn't know how to ask me about it. People didn't know how to say, what was it like being in intensive care? Nobody asked, what is it like to be told you're going to die? Nobody asked that question. And before I knew it, I slipped back into being asked, like, how was my planning going? Because that was a comfortable question. Back to Charlotte talking about being comfortable. Sometimes we don't want to ask the uncomfortable questions, particularly when we come to mental health and well-being. But I encourage us to do so. And I encourage us that when we see the word resilient being used in a document or a curriculum, to actually flip it and question why we don't make space to be vulnerable. And I think a lot of this goes back to, as educators, wanting to be strong for our learners and being that strong role model. But when you realize that actually being a vulnerable person and admitting your humanity and your morality actually makes you a stronger role model. For example, when I came home from intensive care, I was obviously very emotional, and it was the first time my children probably saw me cry properly, really, the proper crying, the ugly crying where you just can't stop. And afterwards I felt awful, like, oh my goodness, like, I didn't want my children to see me cry. I like them to see me as a strong, empowered woman. And then it made me think, actually, is that doing them a disservice if I'm making them think that we're always resilient and we always have a strong, resilience to things, and grit? That's another word we see thrown out. Why not make space for vulnerability? And I talk a lot as well to my students around artificial intelligence. Again, we don't have time to talk about AI today. I'm sure you have your own views on AI, love it or hate it, or are scared of it. All of the above are fine. But actually, when we question what artificial intelligence does, I mean, we might say it can do everything. Elon Musk says in 20 years, none of us will need jobs unless we want them. So good news, you might be fully retired in years. However, the question is then, what will that leave for us as humans? And I would encourage you to think, therefore, it leaves us being human. Perhaps that's the only thing we will have that the robots and that AI will not have, is being human. So actually, what is the biggest strength we have is our vulnerability. So I really encourage my trainee teachers to not be afraid to be vulnerable. And this doesn't mean crying in front of the kids, but it does mean accepting that we all experience a range of emotions, and then thinking about strategies that work. And many strategies will work. I mean, I do breathing strategies, box breathing. I'm sure we all have the box breathing, where you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold it. I'm sure we all use the box breath. I do that with my 4-year-old when she comes home, when she's been masking all day and she's about to explode. We do that. I do it with my almost 13-year-old when he comes home after that preteen hormonal day, and we'll do a box breath. I do it with my husband when he comes home. I do it myself when, all my students' markings just come in and I've got 250, 3,000 word assignments to mark. I use the box breath. So we must also, I talked about removing that boundary between our home and school, but also trying to dissolve some of that boundary between our learner and the teacher. And it's not about trying to be their friend. 100% no. You're always a professional. You're always the educator. But where we can dissolve some of that boundary around mental health, what works for us may work for them. Obviously, it's about thinking what's age appropriate. But when we admit that we're vulnerable, we can actually have a greater insight to how our young people might feel. That's me getting off my soapbox about resilience. But I hope next time you see that word, you actually think, perhaps we shouldn't say you can do it. And again, I love Carol Dweck. I'm sure we all love Carol Dweck's growth mindset, fixed mindset. I talk about it, but also, are we doing our children a disservice if we make them think you can do anything? Because I talk to my children, you can try and do whatever you want to do. You're amazing. But equally, you might not be an astronaut, and you have to think about how that might not happen for you. And actually, are we doing disservice if we make them think they can do anything? And I love the power of yet. I'm sure we all talk about yet, and you can't do it yet, but maybe you can never do some things, and that's okay. I talk to my students. I'll say, you probably won't all be head teachers, but that's okay. And just accepting that whatever is will be, and that is okay. And we don't need to think that we need to reach the top of the ladder. It wouldn't work. Imagine if all your staff were head teachers, it wouldn't work for you. If you all wanted to be the chair of governors, it wouldn't work. So we all have different strengths, and all our journeys are different. So this is another thing that I think is just important to have on our radar. So moving forward into this bit. So I was doing a bit more digging about what you do as governors. I know about the meetings. Hopefully they are well refreshed, although I'm sure many of you might do them online or in person. But I was reading around how you are actually so powerful. I do remember my one friend who's a head teacher telling me that the governors did not agree to her pay rise. So she certainly knew you were powerful. None of you, she's not in Essex, just to confirm. But actually, do you realize how valuable and powerful you are? I'm sure a lot of it is caught up with the red tape, the mitigating financial risk that I read about here. I know there's a lot of pressure on you, but what I want us to think about is actually you are so powerful. You are in a really key place to role model that mental health and well-being that I was alluding to earlier. So how can you support mental health from your role as governors? And this is what I'm kind of here to unpick with you. So I'm just going to talk maybe for about 5-10 more minutes, and then hopefully we can have a bit of a chat if you'd like to, or maybe even just Nigel, you might want to have a conversation with me. If people don't want to talk. I pulled out the 3 things that it seems you're dealing with. But again, heckle me if I'm wrong. Managing the budget, overseeing the curriculum and the outcomes, and dealing with staff. I'm also aware, as I said at the start, that I know your time is not endless. You're not superhuman. You don't have time machines. Well, I don't think you do. Again, I might have missed that when I was reading about governors. If you have time machines, I'm sorry. But I don't think you do. And I know you're busy people. And so I also know that we don't want to get into a position where we're trying to implement things that just make more workload. We don't want to come up with flash in the pan solutions that either cost a lot of money because we don't have money to spare, or generate workload that is not purposeful. So the other thing that I would say going forward is not being afraid to change things, implement things, and not being afraid to take them away if they're not working. So here's the first of the 5 things. Does your school have a staff mental health and wellbeing plan? So if you do, amazing. If you don't, here's an example. And I've got this one from a website that I'll share at the end in the resources. This is an idea of a simple action plan template. You can see how briefly it is filled in. But if you're someone who loves details on a plan, then you could add more. But it's the idea of thinking about what you could do, what actions you could take to develop and support staff mental health and wellbeing. So the example on this, sorry if you can't see it very well, I'll just read it out, is develop a staff wellbeing action group. So then it might consider for that the SLT to think about who would be in the group, who would lead it, when it would happen, and how you'll check if it's successful. I was recently approached to be on a governing board as the lead for wellbeing. I wonder, on your governing team, is there someone themselves who is maybe that wellbeing link governor, or the head of wellbeing? Do you need to potentially recruit a governor with a specialty in that area, perhaps? Or is there someone already on your team that could step up and would enjoy taking more of a role in that area? The second one, I thought this was a really nice idea about showing appreciation. So I asked you earlier to think, how are your staff recognised for what they do? You are so important. I know governors are important, because when I was in school, it was the one time the biscuits came out in the staff room because we knew the governors were coming. Sorry if you don't all get biscuits. You are leaders, you are powerful leaders. So not forgetting how just that kind word, or that seeing them, actually seeing something that a staff member has achieved, can mean so much. One comment, one email can mean so much to the staff that you are governing, and motivate them, and also leads into all the things we spoke about earlier, like teacher retention, teacher fulfillment, and satisfaction. So, really question, when did you last connect with the actual staff, with the teachers, and say well done for something? Because trust me, coming from you, that would mean a lot. Another one I want to say, again, back to the idea that we don't want to generate workload because we're already so busy, that we actually don't always need a formal strategy. Now, we love strategies in school, don't we? But how about this idea, that it's just about understanding what the well-being situation is like, what the landscape is like in your school or setting. So the idea that it might just be talking to your head or your SLT around what needs to be done in the school, what is happening in the school, and thinking then, how can we articulate what is happening? So again, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to implement a strategy, but could it be a case of making sure it's more visible to staff so they know what is happening, or think about more things that could happen in your school? Number 4, this kind of links to the second one that I said, which is where you are leaders that the teachers look up to and the staff look up to. So thinking how you bringing that compassion and empathy is part of being that good role model for the people around you. So I've put here around compassion. Again, I do a lot of workshops on compassion and empathy. I don't know if anyone watched the Soccer Aid match last night. Some of you might have seen that. Was that yesterday or 2 days ago? There was a lovely charity football match, and in it spoke about Ukraine, and it looked at the effect that the invasion of Ukraine is still having. So again, just one thing to pop in that some of you might have been touched by. I took in a mother and son from Ukraine. We actually wrote a book for charity, a non-profit, about the little Ukrainian boy's refugee journey. And as off the back of that, I realised we do need to talk more about compassion and empathy. So how well do your staff understand compassion and empathy? How well are you modelling that? And again, this isn't more work just for you, but it's about us thinking that, how can we show that appreciation? How can we make sure there are signposts for staff? Because again, it is certainly not in your remit to be that listener to all the staff problems. So at the bottom there, just to point out that there is a free helpline which staff can contact. There's a phone number where staff can speak confidentially to a qualified counsellor. We also have, of course, Samaritans. Some of you might be Samaritans yourself. How visible are these things around your staff room, perhaps to ensure that staff do feel supported, and particularly if they don't want to raise the issues within their school, that they are aware there are ways they can seek help outside of school, and making sure that they know that is okay, like not feeling like their job's at risk if they seek help, for example. And then considering use of budget, and this is kind of where I'm going to finish before we go into the conversation, in case anyone would love to share. I would love to know, because as I say, you're the experts here, not me. Are there any good initiatives that you've seen in your setting? Any tools you're using? Maybe an app that your staff have been given access to, that you think is helping support wellbeing in your school? So I would love us also to think about what we can share in this last part of the meeting, perhaps around good things that you've seen and good practice that you've seen, either in your setting or in other settings you may have visited. And if you want to type them in the chat, that'd be great, because then we do have that written kind of chart of them. But also I'm eager to learn what's working well for you as well. And then just before I finish talking and we start the conversation, I've just got some recommended reading. So I mentioned to you the TES Wellbeing Report. There's the link for that. If you've not heard of it, it's definitely worth the read. If you have heard of it, you're amazing. And you can also view that video that I mentioned, where I was invited to talk a bit more about the Wellbeing Report. You can find that through there. There's also the Government Wellbeing Charter. Have you read that? If you have, you're amazing. If you haven't, there's the link to it on the government website. I know there's stuff coming up around elections, etc., but for now, here's our Wellbeing Charter. So do have a read of that if it's not something you're aware of. Number 3, again, I know you haven't got a lot of time, but if you have not looked at this website, this is such a good place to go. The charity is called Education Support. They've got stuff on there for governors like you, stuff for teachers. The action plan from that I showed you in bullet point 1 that was around creating a mental health action plan, loads of free resources, nice little videos and bits and bobs. So if you haven't heard of Education Support, it's educationsupport.org.uk. It's worth a little nosy. And last but not least, again, I'm just doing a little bit of self-selling here. I do run a podcast. It's called Not Another Teacher Podcast. We just got into the Apple charts, but that's me and my co-host Martin Malone. You can listen back to the episodes there. We invite on teachers from all different roles. I actually had this amazing head teacher on it last week, head teacher of a secondary school, Christy Carter, who actually ended up feeling suicidal and developed PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in her role as a secondary head. She ended up having to retire at 41 from teaching and is now coaching leaders. So that was the most recent episode that aired last Friday. But equally, if any of you ever want to come on, I've never had a governor on. Nigel, maybe you can repay the favour and come on my podcast. But I'm really keen for, if any of you'd like to come on, or if you know teachers who, again, want to have their voice heard, I'm always keen to have people come on and share their voice, just half an hour episodes. So again, feel free to reach out, because what I told you I write a lot of stuff, but my favourite stuff I write is where I share people's voices, because I think a big part of mental health and wellbeing is feeling heard, isn't it? It's feeling seen and feeling heard, and actually feeling like we have a voice. And I'm sure that if we share some initiatives now, we'll see that the best ones are where people have a voice, whether it's anonymously, whether it's through discussion in meetings, whether it's through a notice board in your staff room. I've seen lovely things where staff write post-it notes that appreciate each other and put them on a board publicly. And it's not always about those. It's not always about that public recognition. Sometimes, like I say, just you as a governor, dropping a little compliment in someone's ear can mean the world. So just really thinking that it's about supporting each other, raising voices, sharing our stories. So lots of reading there. But as I say, if you were one of the people who loves research like me, drop me an email. I will happily send you more stuff. And one last thing, one thing I often do when I talk in a room is we calculate our own wellbeing scores. If you're interested, I'll happily send you a free copy of my wellbeing quiz. There's my email again. I can just ping you the PDF and I can tell you what your score means if you just wanted to do that for fun. It's quite interesting to actually, even if you don't find out what your score means, just to do the activity is quite fun. It's something you just do on your own. So yeah, if anyone's interested in that, drop me an email. There's just not enough time to do this tonight. I wish we had like 3 hours, but that would probably be the opposite of wellbeing, to sit in a Zoom meeting for 3 hours on a Monday. And then just before I open up the floor, I just want to share my my information again. So poppy.gibson@aru.ac.uk, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I would love to hear from you. I know I'm sure you've got your own questions and your own things you want to move forward with, even if it's in your personal life. I'm always just really happy to talk about wellbeing in any way. So please do get in touch anytime, not just today, because you might all just want to go and eat dinner probably, but anytime in the future, I'm always happy for you to reach out. So on that note, looking out for timing, Nigel.
Brilliant.
I'm just going to come back in case anyone wanted to share anything or ask anything. Feel free to type in the chat or on. And yeah, just thank you for your time. The fact you're here is already just so wonderful. The fact that you're making space to listen to this tonight. So yeah, just thank you for being here. And if you don't want to share or stay, I just wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, Poppy. So any questions for Poppy or comments?
Oh, I can see Linda's saying that they would like to share. Yeah, Linda, are you happy to unmute?
I think, yeah, I should be. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perfectly. Loud and clear.
Great, lovely, jolly good. Thanks ever so much, Poppy. That was great. That was really good. I
Thank you.
I really just wanted to share something with you because well-being is, as you say, is a very important subject in any work situation, well, home work situation. But in the school, I'm chair of governors at the Gilbert School in Colchester. I'm also a member of the Trinity School governing body. It's a new secondary school in the north of Colchester that is just establishing itself. But of course, all of our schools, all of us here tonight, we've all been through COVID. And during that time, well-being changed considerably in the working life, particularly in schools. All teachers, many teachers are having to work online, which is something they'd never had to do before. They were at home, they were teaching at home. Many of us were perhaps frightened is a bit over the top, but I think it was a frightening time when, you know, there were many people dying and so on. And a lot of teachers went through a really tough time. And well, our schools are very good. We do have quite a lot of well-being going on. Maybe not so much at the moment, which I'll explain. But yeah, so that was very, very different. And I had a conversation with our head teacher during COVID on well-being. It was just well-being. And she was telling me that well-being at that time was taking things away from teachers. So many of the stuff that was a normal, perhaps a normal process, a normal meeting or something that went on, she was pulling away everything she could do to take away any pressure or stress. And she was encouraging staff to go out for a walk. You know, normally they wouldn't leave the school perhaps during the day, but she was saying, if your timetable is such and you can go for a walk, go out in the middle of the day. So they did their very best. Well-being certainly wasn't at its best during COVID. Well, we just got through that, and then the Gilbert School, fortunately, suffers from this aerated concrete, and 65% of the school was closed last September.
Oh my
So
goodness.
this year has been incredibly hard. They're working out of marquees and metal cabins. That's all had to be facilitated and bought. I've seen teachers walking across the playgrounds with trolleys with resources piled high, trying to get them into the cabins, etc. The marquee started off having problems with spiders, would you believe? The cabins had to get warm, and it was, I mean, and there was health and safety, which was another huge thing. But I think the whole thing was that well-being went out the window, whether we like to say, oh, that's well-being, for a while. And I'm sorry to say, but the word that you were talking about, resilience, was huge, because all of our teachers had to be incredibly resilient to even begin to get through this year. You know, we are very aware of it, and the school, it's not as if the school has shut itself off from well-being, but actually a lot of what you did has not been done, and it can't be done because of the way we're operating. It's getting better, but it's going to be actually Christmas this year before our school gets back to being normal. I mean, it's happening, it looks brilliant, it's coming along, but unfortunately we're still working with cabins and marquees, and that's the way it'll be for a while. But But the interesting thing as well is that we do teach our children to be resilient. It is one of the words that is used, and doesn't mean to say the only thing, of course, because I totally understand what you said about being resilient. You never want that to be the uppermost thing any time, but it is something that in life you have to be resilient, and you know, our students are taught that word, and the fact that they have to learn to be a bit resilient to get through life. But so sorry to ramble on, but it was just it's just that well-being has been very, very different in our schools now for a long time, and we really are now having to gradually pick ourselves up on it again.
Wow.
Thank you on that, Linda.
Linda, can I just say that is a lot?
and the teachers, I mean, our teachers have just been incredible. We do have a wellbeing governor, which is our Sarah, and she's online tonight somewhere here. She's
wonderful.
She's listening in, and we do intend to do a wellbeing visit into the school. That's going to be done very soon. We hope within the next 2 or 3 weeks. We thought we'd do this session with you first, and then we'll plan to go in. But we have got to pick ourselves up. But we do have, we do have a good wellbeing plan, and there's an awful lot there that we can pick up on very easily. So it's not as if we're not prepared. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Linda, can I just say, firstly, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure we're all very grateful to hear that. And also, Sarah, thank you for joining. So, firstly, I just want to say, clearly, it's testimony to the strength of your school and teachers that you are still coming through this after dealing with so much. And I do agree. I just want to say as well, I don't think talking about resilience is wrong, but I think we need to know that we don't need to always just be resilient. And actually to remember, like, I agree, your teachers sound amazing. You sound amazing. But we need to also know there is a point, at which point we can't just keep going. And we do need to admit we either need support or a change in behavior, or something to change. And so I think you're right. We do need to be resilient, but to remember that there's not only one trajectory in that, and it can change and look different ways. And there are times when actually we can stop being resilient for a bit. But no, just thank you for sharing. And sorry about the concrete. That was the one thing we did not all need to come, wasn't it? That was awful.
Absolutely.
Awful. And you know, for everyone, as you say, the teachers, the leaders, the governors, also the parents then who were counting down to return their children to school, you know, working parents as well, and carers. It was a lot for everybody. We could never have seen that coming. But just thank you so much for sharing, and just keep being wonderful, as I know you will be. You didn't even need this session, but I'm glad you came because I loved hearing what you're doing.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you, Poppy.
Thank you.
There's some lovely comments in the chat.
Nigel and Rod, can I just say, really great to thank you everyone that's typing in the chat, and really great to see some of them that are doing those wellbeing surveys with staff. So I know Heather said they've just done a wellbeing survey, and Sarah said they've just undertaken staff wellbeing survey. So this goes back to what I'm saying about voices, isn't it? Having a voice already makes you feel more cared about and connected. So even something as simple as that. I saw someone else has asked, can you recommend a survey? I don't know if anyone's picked that one up. Staff having a voice. I agree with you, Pav, definitely so important. Because we have school council. I mean, we try and give the children a voice, but where is the staff voice to come through? Where's the teacher council? Some really good comments. I don't know if Nigel, is anything you picked up on or anyone else wanted to unmute?
It's Ruth Howell said, can you recommend a wellbeing survey? We did one last year with anonymous responses, which meant that issues couldn't really be addressed. That's very difficult because a lot of schools are so small, even though you're doing an anonymous one, you know exactly who's saying what. But yeah, so.
Yeah, that would have been all right in a small school, but it was actually a very big one.
Right.
And people certainly expressed their voices to the detriment of the well-being of the head teacher. But I just wondered, if there's but obviously we couldn't address it because we didn't know who'd written those things.
I think, speaking on behalf of Poppy, we need to ask for a copy of her wellbeing score. Be a good starting point. Just for all of us in attendance tonight to ask Poppy for email for this wellbeing exercise. Be a good point to start from. That'd be great. So we've
Yep.
literally come to the end of our time, I'm afraid. The screen will go blank in a minute if we don't end it. So Rod, over to you to wind things up, and then I'd like to speak to Poppy a bit afterwards, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Poppy, for your support this evening. You certainly raised a number of issues which I find that I will take back, and I'm sure everybody here tonight will take back quite a number of things that we can address with our staff and their head teachers. So thank you everybody for attending. If you've got any suggestions on future coffee and chat sessions, we'd be very grateful if you would email us and let us know the subjects that you want covered.
Thank you, Rod. And one final thing, please, if you require copies of the slides and also recording to your fellow governors, please get in contact and I will gladly send them through in due course.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you very much. I'm going to stop recording now. And I can ask Poppy just to hang on for a minute so I can have a chat